There you go. All right. $12:59. Hi. Okay, 1 o'clock, close enough. Good afternoon, and welcome to our second Saturday seminar series. I'm Susan Jones. I'm the collections manager here at the Animas Museum. And as a lot of you may know, we've been talking about, for a couple of years now, a bunch of big anniversaries that are happening in 2026. The signing of the Declaration of Independence, of course, on July 1st, the Dominguez and Escalante expedition, which happened in August, Colorado statehood, which of course, August 1st is going to be Colorado's 150th birthday, the founding of Animas City. Animas City was established 150 years ago, and we've got a new exhibit on that upstairs if you haven't checked that out yet. Now, it also marks the 120th anniversary of the signing of the Antiquities Act and the creation of Mesa Verde National Park. And, somebody said to me the other day, she couldn't believe that it's been 20 years already because she still got the t-shirt from the centennial, of Mesa Verde. But since March was Women's History Month, and these two things are kind of connected because Mesa Verde is known as the Women's Park. And that's the story we're going to talk about today. For the centennial, Dwayne Smith did write a book called Women to the Rescue, Creating Mesa Verde National Park. And so this is a really great resource. And Judith Reynolds has also written articles on the Women's Park and the founding of Mesa Verde. So I'm really just taking this opportunity to shine a light on the story. And, it's kind of when people forget. And so we have a lot of information, and we're just going to remind you what happened 120 years ago. And we've got some great photographs in our collection that I don't think have been seen a lot, like this one. This photograph is probably taken around 1917, and they were members of the Klan Schluter family. They're sitting up on, probably up on Sun Temple. So we love that one. Real quick, let me do some housekeeping for those on Zoom. We're using Zoom's webinar feature, which means that you're all muted and your videos are off. At the bottom of the screen, and you may need to mouse down to it, there are some icons. We've disabled the chat function today, so please use the Q&A. We're going to be monitoring it today. And we also are supporting closed captioning, but you need to turn it on. So if you're on Zoom, you just navigate down to those icons, click on captions and enable show captions, and it'll be green if it's enabled. So we'll ask everybody to hold questions till the end. In Zoom, if you can't wait, you can go ahead and type your question in. But at the end, we'll take questions both from people here live and those on Zoom. And this session is being recorded. So with that, let's go. All right. Let's see. So where do we get the title for the talk today? Well, for the first word, we get this from Harriet Beecher Stowe. She wrote in 1896 that women are the real architects of society. Now, Harriet Beecher Stowe, of course, was a famous abolitionist, the author of Uncle Tom's Cabin, which interestingly was the best-selling book in the 1850s, second to the Bible in the United States. So she was a writer, a teacher, a reformer, and supporter of women's rights. And she recognized the importance that women played in shaping cultural values and social structures. And, at that time, women were very successful in supporting abolition, but still fighting for the right to vote and also fighting temperance, which, people think, what is that all about? But at the time, alcohol was causing major problems for communities and families. So it's not as horrible as it sounds, but it still probably wasn't a very good idea, or at least it wasn't well implemented. How about we'll say that? So during the 19th century and into the 20th century, women were not welcome in many spaces, including politics. But as middle to upper class women developed, you had some very intelligent and energetic women who, many of them who'd already raised their children, and they had the time and resources to devote to these causes that would really change society. And one of those causes that women adopted in the 19th century was preservation, which gives us a second word in our title. The Mount Vernon Ladies Association was the very first National Historic Preservation Organization in the United States. Yeah, wow. Its pioneering efforts in the field of preservation set an important precedent and has served as a model for many, including here in Southwest Colorado. This photo was taken about 1870. You can see Mount Vernon and kind of in pretty sad shape in the background, and the ladies of the group. You know, a little bit of background. After George Washington died, the house and property passed down through the family, ultimately to John Augustine Washington III. And he was having financial trouble keeping the place up. So Anne Pamela Cunningham stepped up and convinced him to sell the property. She had to, though, raise the equivalent of $5.7 million to purchase it, which she did in 1858. Now, think of that. This is 1858. Mount Vernon's in Virginia. So this is before the Civil War, and she was working a lot with other Southern women. She created the association comprised entirely of women, and she kind of set it up that a regent was the president equivalent, and then selected vice regents from the membership, and then lady managers organized in each of the states to help raise money. And today, the organization still thrives under women and in that same structure. And they continue to own and operate the Mount Vernon site, which is kind of interesting. It never got nationalized or state. It's still owned by the Ladies Association. And this model later on is going to be important to how Mesa Verde was actually preserved. Now, for those of us who live in Southern Colorado, Mesa Verde is a magical and a sacred place. Now, I love this photo. There's Cliff Palace down there and an unidentified woman sitting up in front. This photograph was taken by Wesley Rowland. Rowland was a photographer here in Durango, and he also did some survey work as well. And we have a lot of his photos. They're absolutely incredible. This is probably late teens, maybe early 20s. You know, although Mesa Verde isn't in La Plata County today, it was until 1889. So so we can still say we're part of La Plata County, or Mesa Verde, even though it's in Montezuma County today. And you know, the title gateway to Mesa Verde has been contested between Durango, Mancos, Cortez. You know, everybody's kind of fighting for it, but I vote for Durango. You know, it was really the gateway that you had to take the railroad and get off the train here at Durango. And Mancos and Cortez never, especially back then, they didn't have all the infrastructure, the hotels and all of the restaurants to take care of people. And you'll talk about some other stories which make Durango a big part. You know, in those days, you came to Durango on the Denver Rio Grande, and then you rode a horseback or a carriage or wagon to get to Mancos until 1891, when the Rio Grande Southern Railroad was complete. Then, man, it was sweet. You took the Denver Rio Grande to Durango, got on the Rio Grande Southern to Mancos, and you had like a day's ride. Big deal, right? So compared to what we do today, it's just so amazing what they put up with. But it was also, Durango was a gateway city, but it was also the women of Durango who were architects of the preservation of the park, along with women from Colorado Springs and Denver. But the Durango women made a big part of it. And I want to walk through the timeline a little more closely. So people were living in the Mesa Verde area at least as early as 400 BCE. As we kind of like to say, this is a great place to live, and people have loved to live here for a long time, even without the modern conveniences that we have today. But in the late 13th century, the inhabitants of Mesa Verde left, migrating to the south, where the Pueblos and New Mexico and Arizona are today. The Utes, the Navajo, and the Jicarilla Apache knew about these sites in Mesa Verde, but they didn't enter them. They left them alone out of respect for the spirits that lived there. In the 18th century, though, Spanish explorers started venturing into the area, looking for gold and silver and routes to the missions that were established in what we now call California. For instance, Juan Rivera came through here in 1765. His expedition didn't get as far south as Mesa Verde, but they did record sites of Pueblo ruins along the way. Dominguez and Escalante, of course, were here in 1776, and we're going to be talking more about them this year a lot. They didn't make it to Mesa Verde either, but they too found ruins, like the Escalante Pueblo that's right next to the place, the Canyon of the Ancients Visitor Center, place formerly known as the Anasazi Heritage Center. Yeah. So the Old Spanish Trail actually followed the same routes, and we have our Old Spanish Trail exhibit next door. If you haven't checked that out, be sure to check out that new exhibit. And that trail was used from 1829 until 1848. It skirted Mesa Verde, but around that time, somebody, and we don't know who, named the Green Table or Mesa Verde, because people would talk about it, but mainly just from the Mesa geographical data. But, we're going to talk a lot more about all those trails as we go on. But then later, the first Anglo-Europeans weren't here probably until 1859. And that's when a man named John Newberry, who was a geologist with the San Juan exploring expedition, he actually climbed the mesa, but he missed the ruins. He called this terra incognito. So he kind of missed all the fun stuff. There is evidence of other people. We don't have written records, but as people explored the ruins, they found people could not resist, scratching their name in the rock or in the beams. So yeah, we know that people were here, but we don't know what they were doing. But then in 1873, John Moss established Parrot City with a private treaty with the Utes. And people started to realize kind of what was out here. But John Moss and his buddies were so busy looking for silver and gold in the La Plata Mountains that they didn't worry about those ruins. And if so many of the things that we're talking about today tie into programs that we've done already. So for instance, if you want to hear about Parrot City in early La Plata County, we've got a talk, Gold Rush to the La Platas in La Plata County, 150 years, and they're all recorded on our website. And it wasn't until the Hayden Survey of 1874 when the famous photographer of the West, William Henry Jackson, met John Moss. And John told them about these ruins, but we're too busy for them. But yeah, they're out there. And Jackson took some of the very first photographs of the ruins. And then again on the 1875 survey, Jackson came back with William Holmes, and they set out to further document the ruins and the artifacts in the area, and name one ruin that we call today 16 Window House, which is kind of near Cliff Palace in that area. And yes, we've got a talk on the Hayden survey as well too, that you can check out. So here's some of Jackson's photographs. The photograph is called Two-Story House, and it was on Moccasin Mesa, east of Chapin Mesa. And this photograph is from History, Colorado. His work was just absolutely gorgeous, especially considering the conditions that he was working under. Just beautiful, beautiful photos. And then also he did beautiful sketches. And so he sketched some of the pottery that he found. And all of this went into the Hayden Survey's report that didn't come out till 1876. And at the same time, 1876, of course, that was the 100th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration and all that kind of good stuff. So in Philadelphia, they had a big fair. It was called the Centennial Expedition that year. And the Jackson shows some of his photos, some of his sketches. He also collected some artifacts from Mesa Verde, and they were shown at the fair in Philadelphia, and they were kind of quite a hit. And people, just started thinking, what's out there? Wow, we want to see this. This is great. Luckily for us, it was really hard to get there. But people were coming in, and they were stealing, I'm going to say stealing stuff. They were destroying things in the effort to find stuff that they wanted to steal, and just totally vandalizing a lot of the ruins. And not, there's no documentation, and all provenience information was kind of totally lost. So this is kind of when the problem started. Now, in 1880, the Wetherill family homesteaded on the Menkes River, and their story becomes so intertwined with Mesa Verde. They didn't intend that at all. They just wanted to farm and ranch, but they soon realized what was out there, and that they could supplement their income by finding and selling artifacts. Yeah. One of the first, they found a bunch of artifacts, and they took them to the Front Range, and they were trying to sell them, and they wanted $3,000 for these, and nobody was taking the bait until what's now History Colorado, the State Historical Society. They purchased the Wetherills' first collection for that $3,000, and that was the start of the Ancestral Pueblo collection that's at History Colorado today. One of the tourists that they took out to the ruins was a young lady named Virginia Donahue, who visited in 1882 and probably was one of the first white women to see the ruins. In 1886, pot hunting was just getting out of hand, and the first calls for national park protection were being made, but totally unheeded. Now, Donahue returned that year in 1886 and did some more exploring. She claimed to be the first person to see Balcony House. She probably wasn't, but she was a good writer, and that was important because she saw these things and was able to convey the excitement and the treasures that were out there. And Balcony House, of course, is still a popular site today. And then in 1889, La Plata County and Montezuma County split. So yeah, okay, we'll let it go, but we still keep our ties to Mesa Verde. And that was the year that Richard Wetherill discovered, air quotes, Cliff Palace. It had been seen before. Jackson photographed Cliff Palace. Al Wetherill had seen it, but he hadn't been in it. And the old story goes that Richard Wetherill and his buddy were chasing after cattle, and they saw these ruins, and they were probably the first ones inside it. All bets are off after that. This is an early picture of Cliff Palace before a lot of the rubble was cleared out and the stabilization that you see today was done. This photo is taken by Clayton Perkins, who was a Durango folk. And we'll see some of the other pictures he took. He was an amateur photographer. He was in real estate and insurance to make money. But he and his wife, Zadie Rockwood Perkins, came out pretty early on, and we'll see some more pictures. They're just amazing. Now, this picture was probably taken a little later, but there's the problem. People were just, look at all those beautiful Oyas that these guys had stolen, and they were proudly showing them off and selling them. And this was the problem. This actually was taken about 1910, and this was not in Mesa Verde. It was in the Ute Mountain Ute Tribal Park, which is probably worse because yes, they were absolutely stealing from the Ute Mountain Utes. People were taking stuff, they were trashing what they left behind. I mean, these are the kind of days, when Chaco, they blew up one of the walls at Pueblo Bonito so they could get to the goodies inside. And people thought nothing of doing that. And there was nothing to stop them and no protection. And even in Durango, many families had what they called Indian rooms. in their houses, and they display all the pottery and uh, remains that wouldn't even show those pictures anymore. Whereas they just showed them off that, hey, isn't this great? And other people made money by selling them to museums or other collectors. So now we're getting into the 1890s. Now people are calling for the protection of the park, but nothing is being done. In 1891, a young Swede, and I won't say his name right, I know it, called Gustav Nordenskjöld, came to Colorado. He had tuberculosis, which eventually killed him at the age of 27, which is really young. But he fell under the spell of the cliff dwellings. He hired the Wetherells to take him into Mesa Verde, and he did the first scientific study of the area. Um, and again, Judith Reynolds did her book that she wrote with her husband David on Nordenskjöld, and she can say his name properly too, is absolutely wonderful. And I know the library's got it. And we have a talk that Judith did recorded on our website too about Nordenskjöld. I kind of always thought he was a thief. But when Judith talks about it and you really understand what he was doing, he took a lot of stuff, but he also did a lot of photographing, and did beautiful photography work and a lot of documentation, and wrote the first scientific study about the cliff dwellings of Mesa Verde. But as he was trying to leave and head back to Sweden, he came here to Durango, the gateway to Mesa Verde, and he went to the depot, the railroad depot, and he had like 600 artifacts that he had all created up, and the railroad agent refused to ship them. And he was like, what the heck's going on? So he went back to the Strader, and the police met him, and they arrested him. And it's finally people were waking up in Durango and saying, wait a minute, what is going on here? We don't want this to happen. Now, it was worse because he was a foreigner, because he was from Sweden. People turned a blind eye to their neighbors maybe doing the same thing, but they certainly didn't want Nordenskjöld taking all this plunder from our treasure. So he was under house arrest at the Strader because the county jail had burnt down in the 1889 fire. So I guess there could be worse places to be under house arrest. And he hired a lawyer, and I think it was from the McCluskey law firm in town. And he was kept under guard for a month, and he wasted about a month of his time. But the bottom line was he didn't do anything illegal. At the time, there was no Antiquities Act. What he did was just fine. And they got State Department officials involved, and everybody got involved. But in the end, they had to let him and the artifacts go. But this kind of incident showed really that legislation was going to be necessary to protect the ruins, and the sooner the better. But still, things keep happening. So in 1893, it was the Columbian exhibition in Chicago. Now, it was supposed to be in 1892 because it was supposed to celebrate the 400th anniversary of Columbus discovering, there's that word again, America. But their plans were just so grandiose, it slipped a year. So it was in Chicago. You might have heard of the White City, and there's some really awesome books about it. It was just sounded like it was absolutely amazing. And it included what you see here. This is a paper mache model, nearly full size, of cliff dwellings. And it was one of the most popular exhibits at the fair. And with the Centennial exhibit in 1876 perked up interest in Mesa Verde. Well, this solidified it. Yeah, everybody went to the Columbian exhibit. Everybody saw it. And by 1893, the Southern was there. It was easy to get to the ruins in Mesa Verde. And the Wetherells were guiding, and they were doing a good business guiding. And our friend we talked about, Virginia Donahue, spoke at the exhibition. She was one of the few women to present and talk about the ruins. And boy, this is what kind of really kicked it off. And she started talking about not just the ruins, but also the need to preserve them. So in 1897, the Colorado State Federation of Women's Clubs appointed, and we're going to talk more about her, Virginia Donahue McClurg had married just before this, and now she's Virginia McClurg, and they wanted her to investigate and promote the cause of the Colorado cliff dwellings. And so she got 14 people on her committee, and they decided in 1900 to form the Colorado Cliff Dwelling Association. And this Colorado Cliff Dwelling Association was based on the model exactly that the women of Mount Vernon had done. So it's kind of interesting to see the preservation all comes together. Now, who was this Virginia Donahue McClurg? She was born in 1858 in New York City. She was from a very well-bred family. She had revolutionary ancestors and very talented family. She was very well educated. But in 1879, she came to Colorado, like many people, for her health. That cold, dry, high altitude atmosphere. She settled in Colorado Springs, and like a lot of, she was single at the time, and like a lot of single women who came west, she didn't have a lot of things available to do that were respectable, except teach. And so she did. She started a school for girls in Colorado Springs. But on the side, she wrote poetry, and she was published, and she became a reporter, her kind of a travel writer. And that's how she got into the ruins in 1882 and 1886, and that kind of solidified her role. She married Gilbert McClurg in 1889, and he was kind of like an early Chamber of Commerce president for Colorado Springs. So the two of them were a perfect match. They knew how to get their word out. They knew how to speak in public. They knew how to encourage an audience, and they did. She spoke at the Columbian exhibition. She traveled around the state. She had like one of those magic lantern shows with pictures from the ruins. She even traveled around the country and I think she even went to Paris and did one of these talks in French about the cliff dwelling. She was pretty amazing. So once they got the association started, her first task was to arrange for a lease with the Ute Mountain Utes for land until it could be further protected. So in 1899, McClurg and Grace Bishop, who we'll talk more about, she was from Durango, traveled out to Navajo Springs to negotiate with Ignacio and his son Akowitz for a lease on the cliff dwellings. Now, she offered them $300 a year for 30 years, hoping that within 30 years they'd get a park set up. But and Ignacio seemed to like that until she's getting ready to go, and he said, "No, by the way, we want the whole $9,000 up front." Well, yeah, she could do that. She had 300. She was ready to give him $300, but she couldn't do that right away. So they left. McClurg continued to lobby in Washington. She gained support from Colorado Senators Henry Teller, Edward Walcott, and Thomas Patterson. And Patterson even went on one trip out to negotiate with Ignacio. But that one was not a success at all. And I thought about using the headline from the paper, but it has a word that starts with S that's not acceptable today. Like, what kind of man was Patterson to listen to that word? And there was a headline in the paper. Ooh. So that one was not a success. But they didn't keep up. They kept going. Now, right about this time, another name that you hear in conjunction with the founding of the Women's Park is Lucy Peabody. Now, Peabody was born in 1863 in Connecticut, but she was educated in Washington, D.C. And there she became interested in what they called ethnology, kind of anthropology, archaeology today. She was a secretary at the Bureau of Ethnology for 9 years in D.C., and she met a man named William Peabody, who was in the USGS, U.S. Geographical Survey folks, and they got married and came back to Colorado, to his hometown of Denver. So when the Colorado Cliff Dwellings Association was established, Virginia McClurg became the regent and Lucy Peabody became the vice regent, because she had all this background in ethnology, and she also knew how Washington worked. And that maybe in some ways might have made her a stronger leader for preservation, but she was kind of quiet, and but she knew her stuff. And you'll hear both of those names. But while Peabody and McClurg are the names most famously associated with Mesa Verde, the Durango women played a big part. Now, the Federation of Women's Clubs was a big deal in Colorado, and Durango had one of the first federated clubs in the state. It was established in 1882, and that was the Reading Club of Durango, and it still exists. Oh, yeah. They became part of the Federation in 1896, and we remember and honor them for doing a lot of wonderful things, like establishing the Durango Public Library. And they were also heavily involved in the preservation of Mesa Verde. And I love this picture. This is 1903, and the ladies of the Reading Club are posed on the porch of 945 East 3rd Avenue. And at the time, it was the home of Clayton and Zadie Perkins. And Clayton and Zadie Perkins were married in 1901 in the wedding of the century. Zadie was the daughter of Thomas Rockwood. And yeah, we've had a lot of stories about the Rockwood family, not what Rockwood is named after, but we've talked a lot about them. And they just kind of had a kind of fascinating family life. And as we'll see, they got to go out to the ruins pretty early on. The Perkins later moved to 1237 East 3rd, and that's where they're more associated with, but at the time they did live in that house. Charter members of the Reading Club included Mrs. Owen F. Boyle, Mrs. A.P. Camp, Mrs. Gustava Scoville, and Miss Grace Scoville. And those four ladies played a huge part in the establishment of Mesa Verde. Now, the Reading Club, I don't know if this is good or bad, but they did collect and send relics to the Columbian Exposition. So, but the good things they did, they met and entertained the various groups that were heading out to Mesa Verde, and they were supporting the preservation. They raised money. I think every lady chipped in at least 25 cents to help raise money for the park. Some of the women were sent by Mrs. McClurg to Navajo Springs in 1900 to negotiate with the Utes. And they include Estelle Camp. So Estelle was born in 1857 in upstate New York. She was one of the first co-eds at Cornell University, and was always very proud of that. Now, her brother, John McNeil, was a banker here in Colorado, and he had established the Bank of the San Juans in Del Norte. And at one point met this young man named Alfred P. Camp in Del Norte. Alfred was kind of looking for mining. He wasn't sure what he would do. So John kind of got him into the banking world. And John McNeil sent Alfred Camp to Anima City to start a branch of the Bank of the San Juans. And then when Durango was established, of course, in 1880, Camp moved the bank to Durango. It was known as the Bank of Durango at first, right on the corner, what is the northwest corner of Main and 9th. And it eventually became the first national bank that we know, and that's a whole other story. So Estelle came to visit her brother one time in Colorado, and she kind of fell in love with A.P. Camp. And there's this great story. I don't have the picture because Alfred sent Estelle after she went back east, this picture of him and his banking buddies, and they looked rough. Let me tell you, they all had beards and sack suits on, not the fancy, the slick banking guys you'd see today. But Estelle went around showing all her friends, her boyfriend in Colorado, and one of her friends said, I don't know if I would trust my money with a group that look like that. But yeah, worst dressed town, even in 1881. Estelle and Alfred married in 1883, and they moved into their Third Avenue house that I think most people in Durango know about. Now, Estelle got involved in everything. She had 3 children, only one survived past childhood. And so she had a lot of time on her hands, and she was involved in the City Improvement Society. They planted the trees on Third Avenue. She helped raise the money for the organ at the Presbyterian Church. She was, of course, in the reading club. And she was one of the ladies who went in 1900 to Navajo Springs to meet with the Utes. The ladies spent the night. They successfully negotiated with the Utes for a lease for the land that they wanted. And then they couldn't get back, so they had to spend the night over at Navajo Springs. And Estelle never forgot, and I quote, that the Utes staged a wild drunk, dancing and shouting about the building all through the night, and kept them up all night long. But they came back to Durango. They were all excited. They had a treaty. They gave it to the Secretary of the Interior, and he said, "That's no good. We can't accept a treaty that private citizens negotiated." And maybe it was a woman thing. I don't know, but they used the word private citizens, so that fell apart. That didn't happen. But in that group with Estelle was Anna Boyle. Her husband, Owen Francis, had been a miner in Leadville, and they came pretty early on to Durango, where her husband was a merchant here in Durango. They were some of the ones who attended the very first Thanksgiving dinner. Thanksgiving celebrated here in 1881. Anna was a charter member of the Reading Club. We don't know a lot of her story, but she's buried up at Greenmount Cemetery. Now, 2 other members of the party were Jeanette Scoville and her daughter, Grace. Now, I don't have a picture of Jeanette, but we do have this picture. This is from the Center of Southwest Studies, and I love this one. That's Grace in the red right there. And she's with some of her friends, Nettie Jackson and Alice McFadden. All of them are St. Mark's parishioners. And they're in, I think Dwayne Smith used this picture in one of his books where he used the headline that Caroline Romney had used to encourage women to come to Durango because there were so many men here and we needed that socializing effort of the women. So, and then I recently saw this on social media and somebody was thinking these were girls of the line. No. And I don't know if you can see at the very far of the screen, holding the horse's head is George Barnett. The Barnett family was one of the first Black families and a well-respected family in Durango. So this one's a great picture. So Jeanette was born in 1837, and of course she and her husband, who was also a merchant, lived on Third Avenue. They were very active at St. Mark's, and which is kind of incredible when you think about what they had to go through to get there. Jeanette was 63 years old in 1900 when they went out to negotiate with the Utes. Her daughter Grace, and that's Grace, was born in 1863. And she, of course, was quite the young lady here in Durango. And Kip Boyd has done a lot of research about her for St. Mark's. And she was kind of involved in anything and real active. And she actually went with Virginia McClurg in 1889, before the 4 women went, to negotiate with Ignacio, the year that he wanted the $9,000. So she was kind of all over the place. She married a man named Bennett Bishop, and he had a ranch up the Pine River. So it was kind of tough because it was like a 2-day ride up to the ranch, but her parents were here, and she was kind of a socialite, so she kind of went back and forth. They were charter members of the Reading Club as well. and active at St. Mark's. So we owe a debt to St. Mark's too. Another woman who didn't actually move to Durango till 1911 was Ella McNeil. And Ella was Estelle Camp's sister-in-law. So Estelle was McNeil, and Ella and her brother John lived in Denver for many years. And Ella was very helpful to the group, and she was a member of the Cliff Dweller Association because she was able to do a lot of lobbying, not only in Denver, but also in Washington, D.C. So she came out here, and they had a big group in 1901 that came with both Mrs. McClurg and Mrs. Peabody. They came to Durango. The Reading Club had a big celebration for them at the home of Mrs. Thomas Rockwood. And then they all went out under the guidance of the Wetherells and a man named Charles Kelly, who was also an early tour guide, I guess we'll call it. And they toured the ruins. Jesse Fuchs, later an archaeologist at the park, accompanied the group. And so now Lena's more associated with Silverton, but we love telling Lena stories. Lena Allen Webster Stoiber Rood Ellis. Yes. Yes, she did. Yes, she did. So Lena was born Lena Allen. She divorced Mr. Webster. Oh, scandal, scandal. And then she married Edward Stoiber. And Edward Stoiber and his brother Gus found the Silver Lake mine above Silverton. And that was one of the biggies. That was one of the fabulously wealthy ones. The brothers were the mining engineers. And so Lena, and this is back in the late 19th century, she ran the business side of the mine. And the miners called her Captain Jack, and it wasn't a nice thing. She's very strictly controlled when they went to work, how much they could drink, how much they could party in Silverton, and she really watched over them. It's kind of fun. Otto Mears built her a contraption, like with railroad trucks and a bicycle. So she would ride up the Silverton Northern tracks up and down to come into town to Silverton. They had a big mansion called Waldheim up at Silver Lake, and that was, until it burnt down, was pretty amazing. In 1898, Lena entertained the National Federation of Women's Clubs at Waldheim, this place at Silver Lake. She paid for a special train to come all the way from Denver. She was a charter member of the Cliff Dweller Association and had a luncheon in 1901 at the Brown Palace that she paid for Virginia McClurg. So when the Stoibers sold the Silver Lake mine to the Guggenheims for $1.3 million, they moved to Denver. And then, she was active in Denver. But Mr. Stoiber died in an auto accident, so she married Mr. Rood. And Hugh Rood, the story was he was on the Titanic, and he died on the Titanic. But what's really interesting, now remember, she lived in Denver with Mr. Rood. She was a Denver socialite, and Mrs. Brown, I won't call it Mrs. Margaret Brown, never remembered seeing Mr. Rood on the Titanic. And they would have been in the same social club. So some say he faked his death to get away from Lena. So she married one more time and then ended up moving to Italy, where she died in 1935. But she's just such a great character. And she was part of the Cliff Dwellers. But this has nothing to do with it. I couldn't resist when I was doing research. So Lena was also famous for building spite fences. So when she lived in Silverton before they moved to Waldheim, she got into a fight with her sister-in-law. And so she built this fence. It's a 10-foot tall fence. So she wouldn't have to look out the window to see her sister-in-law. I had never seen a picture. That was just amazing. And to this day, there is a law on the books in Silverton that that fences can't be above 6 feet because of Lena. So that one's just great. So all this is going on and all these negotiations are going on. But in 1904, something happened between Mrs. McClurg and Mrs. Peabody. We don't know if Mrs. McClurg was jealous because Mrs. Peabody had a better education in ethnology. She knew more about the cliff dwellings. Maybe she did politics in DC better. We don't really know what happened. But at this time, Virginia McClurg started falling back on that Mount Vernon Ladies Association model, and she did not want the park to be a national park. She wanted Mesa Verde to be like a state park run by women or owned by women. And who knows? Maybe that would be better. I don't know. Maybe not. But Peabody really wanted it to be a national park. And this feud split the Cliff Dwellers Association, caused a rift in the ladies of the Durango Reading Club, although it seemed most of the ladies in Durango backed Peabody. But 1905, it became clear that protection was needed fast as the homesteaders started laying claims closer and closer to the ruins. And people figured the fastest way to protect the place was to make it a national park. So McClurg kind of went along with it, and they introduced bills, and time after time they'd introduce one and it wouldn't get out of committee. They'd introduce another one, wouldn't get out of committee. But finally in December of 1905, Colorado Representative Herschel Hogg from Telluride introduced a bill that in the House that made it out of committee. And at the same time, Senator Thomas Patterson did the same in the Senate, and these called for the creation of national park. And also around the same time, an Iowa representative named John Lacey introduced an Antiquities bill to protect the historic and prehistoric ruins all over the United States that were on public lands. And finally, all these years of finagling and lobbying, it looked like it was all going to work. So early in 1906, the Hogg bill was approved, but oops, they found out that the coordinates, the geographical coordinates that they proposed for the national park didn't include any ruins. Or especially not like Cliff Palace or Balcony House. So, but they could fix that. They made an amendment to the park, and it happened. On June 8th, 1906, the Antiquities Act was signed. It became law in response to the destruction of archaeological sites in the United States. Now, if the Antiquities Act had been in place back in 1891, Nordenskjöld would not have been able to take what he took. And so finally we get that, and nobody else would either, and that's still in effect today. Then Mesa Verde National Park was established by an act of Congress on June 29th, 1906. It was the first cultural park, meaning the first park set aside in the national park system to preserve the works of man instead of just the works of nature. And now only the Secretary of the Interior could approve permits for excavations within the park boundaries, and fines of up to $1,000 or imprisonment of up to 1 year could be levied against anybody who vandalized the ruins or stole artifacts. I love this cartoon. There's Miss Colorado giving the cliff dwellings into the protection of Uncle Sam. So this early map, it's maybe kind of hard to see, but it kind of shows there's this jagged edges. That was because of the amendment to the bill that had to be made in order to include all the most fantastic ruins like Cliff Palace. Now, Virginia McClurg stayed associated with Mesa Verde, even though she lost her battles to keep the park under the women's care, like Mount Vernon had done. Under her direction, and by 1914, the Knife Edge Road was complete. And this is a postcard showing that road. That was the only way into Mesa Verde. And yeah, it looks pretty daunting, doesn't it? Today, it's a hiking trail. It's out of the end of the campground, and you can hike, not all the way out, but you can go out quite a bit. But by 1940, this is what the entrance looked like. And on another postcard, you didn't have to do that Knife Edge Road anymore, so way easier. Then McClurg and archaeologist Edgar Hewitt raised $865 for the restoration of balcony house that's shown here. And this is another Clayton Perkins. Actually, I think this photo was taken by Zadie Perkins, and Clayton is one of the gentlemen in the picture. So they fixed up balcony house, and they even, to the horror of the people at Mesa Verde, put a plaque in the cliff dwelling saying Virginia McClurg saved this place. Not quite, but close. That I think it's in the museum or in the storerooms at Mesa Verde today. These are some great photos from early trips out there. Up in the right corner, that's C.B. Kelly, or Charles Kelly, who replaced the Wetherells as the principal guide. And he had a livery stable in Memphis, and he led concession tours, $15 for a 3-day trip, or $12.50 per person for a party of 2 or more. And there on the far side is a group on horseback heading out to Mesa Verde, and Jesse Fuchs, the archaeologist, is in that group. And then they also, the Ladies Association also arranged for this log cabin in the lower right to be built. And that was called Kelly's Spruce Tree Camp. And this picture, so here's Spruce Tree House on the bottom, and there's that log cabin at the top. And that's where they stayed. And now, sadly, Spruce Tree House has been closed to the public, and I don't know when they're going to get it open. And I think the crack in question is right about where that is. So that's how you got out there. Now that the park was open, people made their way out, and this is the Clayton and Zadie Perkins trip going out. They're looking up Mancus Canyon on that. And they camped out in Johnson Canyon. You can see, I think that's Zadie standing. She's got a dress on and everything, standing in front of the tent. This is the campsite that they had. Women were going out early. This picture includes Mary Ayres, who was a descendant of Robert Sloan, who is one of the early folks brought out by the railroad to found Durango, and he helped found like Graydon's Mercantile. Now, I think, who's the other one in that? Jesse Fairfield is also in that picture. I love, this is a beautiful picture. You might see down in the, kind of in the middle, there's a woman in a long skirt. That's Helen Searcy. And we're going to be talking more about Helen Searcy in our Moments That Made Us, because she was absolutely influential in saving a lot of Durango's history, like in getting the book, The Pioneers of the San Juan Country out. She was also an amateur archaeologist too. So I love that picture. And then in 1917, Virginia McClurg accompanied the first automobile club run to Mesa Verde. And it is great. They loaded their trucks. That's the Durango Depot on the upper left. They loaded their cars on the train. They took the Southern out, and you can see on the lower side, all the cars on the train. And they drove out, and they drove right up to like Sun Temple. And so they had this whole big expedition. And that was the first, but it certainly wasn't the last. Now, sadly, though, since she was cut out of Mesa Verde, Virginia McClurg was part of this monstrosity in Manitou Springs because she was cut out. So she decided to build her own cliff dwellings. And in 1904, they took apart a ruin that was in McElmo Canyon, and they moved it brick by brick on the railroad to Manitou Springs. And they built this, and they claimed it was authentic. And you can still go there today. And there were no cliff dwellers in Manitou Springs. And yeah. Oh, yeah, the stairs, the handrails. Oh, and you can't buy relics, but you can buy all kinds of tourists. I think it costs like $12 for an adult today to go visit. So yeah, it's kind of sad. But Yeah, McClurg's role in the creation of the park might have been forgotten, but we want to remember her today. And Lucy Peabody, the woman they call the mother of Mesa Verde, and the Durango women, Estelle Camp, Anna Boyle, Jeanette Scoville, Grace Bishop, Ella McNeil, Lena Stoiber. They were the architects of preservation. All right. Wow. Any questions? None online? No questions? Mhm.
the, the lady whose last name was Camp,
Uh-huh.
that she formed the Camptown Ladies here in Durango?
No. Yeah, yeah. So no, we're just laughing. It's such a Durango thing. So Mrs. Camp was, the wife of the president of the First National Bank, and she was, up there. And then at one point, I think it was in the 1990s, early 2000s, there was a group of Victorian reenactors that called themselves Mrs. Camp's Town Ladies. And they're not existent anymore. They took her name. Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah. But that's where Mrs. Camps came from. Yeah.
Not every phase. So before Northern Gold was stopped, he and the Wetherells had just ransacked everything. And a lot of shipment were back sent to two places back east. Or one place back east to, I believe, the Peabody Museum. Any relation to the Peabody?
Oh, this is good. Yeah. So I think I forgot to. I have to. I've got the mic on, so I have to repeat questions. So the question is: so Nordenskjold, I won't say they ransacked. They carefully collected. How's that? They carefully curated, but still they took stuff. And yeah, he sent stuff back east, and a lot of artifacts and remains ended up at the Peabody Museum that's associated, I believe, with Harvard. Not relation to Lucy Peabody. But and then a lot went back and ended up in Finland, I believe. Yeah.
Confirming that.
Yes. Yep.
Among historical people, museums, everything, is there any talk, any movement to repatriate?
Oh, oh my gosh, yes. Yeah, the question is about repatriation. Oh my gosh, yes. In 1991, Congress passed the Native American Graves Repatriation Act, or NAGPRA. And since then, there's just been a huge push to repatriate everything that we can. However, NAGPRA is limited to federal institutions or museums that take money from federal money or federal grants. So museums like the Animas Museum are amongst those. So yes, there is a huge push to repatriate. Is there any push from Finland? Yes. Yeah, there's a pull. And as I understand, the remains that were taken by Nordenskjold have been reburied. But Mesa Verde doesn't want all the pots. And I think part of it is we got tons of pots. And part of it is the provenience was lost. So the context was lost. So they're just pretty pots anymore. So as I understand, they're still there, and there's not a push for the relics, but the ancestors have been reburied. All right. If there are no more questions, I got to do real quick the shameless self-promotion because we've got a whole bunch of stuff coming up. So next month in April, our webinar is not going to be on the second Saturday because the Colorado Black Equity Study team is coming to Colorado. They're going to be at Fort Lewis on April 11th at noon, and we're supporting them. They want community members to come and talk about the Black experience in Durango and Southwest Colorado. And they're going to be listening and sharing the results of their study so far. If you're interested in attending, there's no charge, but they asked you to make a reservation because there's going to be lunch. And the link's on our website, and there's a sign on the door as well about it. So that's April 11th. But we're really excited. It just kind of came together this week on April 21st. We've got a Tacoma train. So what that means is we're going to have a coach on the regular Cascade train on April 21st. And our own Charles D. Ferdinando will be a narrator on the coach. And that train will stop and let people on that coach, and only people on that coach, off at the Tacoma power plant. So you get a tour of the power plant with John Ix from Xcel Energy, and then the train will come pick you up again, thank goodness, or else you spend the night, and then head back in. This is a fundraiser both for the Animas Museum and for the Southwest Colorado Humanities Roundtable, the ones who do History Live Month every September. Tickets are $100, and you can get there from our website. So we're really excited about that. There's just one coach though, so if that sounds good, you better be quick and get on there. Then the next day is going to be busy. John Kessel, the professor from the University of New Mexico, who kind of specializes in the early Spanish colonization, is going to be talking about let me say it right, Bernardo Mier y Pacheco, the Dominguez and Escalante's unruly cartographer. And John is just a delight. We've got a couple of his books we'll have for sale then. He's another St. Mark's person. So yeah, there we go. And this is part of our Sesquicemi quincentennial commemoration, looking at Dominguez Escalante. That talk's going to be at 6 o'clock at the Durango Public Library. So yeah, be sure to come out for John Kessel. And then our webinar will be on April 25th, and Andrew Gulliford, the professor at Fort Lewis of History and Environmental Studies, is going to be doing a talk about patriotism and preservation. And so this is again part of the 250-150 celebrations. So we're looking forward to that. That'll be a regular webinar on Zoom and in person, and we are very much looking forward to that. Boo, how's that? So to keep up with us, join us. Members only get access to our online catalog database, and you can sign up on our website or here today. Follow us on Facebook, like us on Instagram, and if you want to see continued programming like this, be sure to hit the donate button or hit the donation jars on your way out. Thanks so much for joining us today. Oh, question is, can we name the women in that photo? No, I wish we could. There's some, the Schluter florals, they're members of that family, but we don't know who they are. Thanks so much for coming. One second. No, I need to stop the record. Oops, excuse me. Come on.